Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories, a game that's often labeled as an okay GTA game, a decent one, not the most praised and highly regarded one, nor the worst one in the franchise either. There's nothing wrong with it necessarily, but it doesn't push the boundaries of what was previously thought as possible either, kinda like what San Andreas did a year prior to the release of LCS. But strangely enough, I think that this is part of what makes the game so great, along with a couple of other things that I really love about this game, and that makes it a really charming and even a quote-unquote cozy game to replay every once in a while. Yeah, cozy probably isn't the best term I could use to describe this game, especially with a protagonist as deranged as Tony Cipriani, who, amongst the usual Grand Theft Auto-ish things that we're all familiar with, also does some of the most inhumane stuff possible, like the Fort Stone incident, but let's not get too sidetracked here. Of course, this game isn't free of any criticism on my end, as I've already dedicated an entire video discussing what I particularly find not so great about this game, which are the villains and the poor writing and execution that we got in the final product. And it's a somewhat in-depth analysis of what I think should have been changed, and how it would have made the story not bland and with an ending that I would call pretty underwhelming. I'm not gonna go into details again, so if you're interested, make sure to check that specific video out. Now that I've got the minor complaints / criticism regarding Liberty City Stories out of the way, let's get into what makes this game charming, and a pleasant experience every single time I hop on to play for a bit. Spoilers, it's pretty much everything else the game has to offer. And let's start with the storyline. Now, despite what I just yapped about less than 30 seconds ago, the humor of this game is pretty high up there with the likes of GTA 5. Because it doesn't take itself too seriously for the most part. The dynamic between Salvatore and Tony is also one that I find really amusing at times, and it actually made me sort of care, or rather appreciate, these two characters. Because they are a little bit different and more fleshed out than what we saw in GTA 3. I mean, dedicating an entire game revolving around them and the Leones in general kinda implies that the characters of Tony and Salvatore are gonna be more likable and have an entertaining dynamic on screen. But there's this goofiness thrown around in almost every mission, with the dialogue and the situations they find themselves in, resulting into moments like these.
What's up, Sal?
I went spying on the Forellis in Fort Stone when all hell broke loose. The Sindatos have gone to war with the Forellis, and I'm stuck here in the middle of a hit. Right now I want to flush this turd into the bay.
Again, it's the game not taking itself too seriously that I really like, and to be fair, if I were in Salvatore's shoes in moments like the ones throughout the storyline, I'd probably react the same way. Of course, you could argue that characters from previous games like Ken Rosenberg in Vice City or Zero in San Andreas were also there for comedic relief, and that's true, but somehow LCS's moments are much more memorable and entertaining to me. Even side missions have moments like these thrown around, and that's a welcome bonus in my opinion.
I think I sneezed on one of those. Never mind, take them anyway.
And speaking of side missions, Liberty City Stories has quite a lot of them. Besides the usual vigilante and taxi driver, there's also a lot of new and unique ones, like a car and even a bike salesman's side job, trash dash, a set of time trials, a sightseeing odd job, an entire new minigame called Avenging Angels, which is somewhat similar to Vigilante, my personal favorite /TV, which also unlocks the #1 best outfit ever in a GTA game, the usual street races, collecting packages, rampages, unique stunts, collecting a list of wanted vehicles, and quite a few others that I haven't talked about. All pretty fun activities to engage with for the most part. And if I'm doing a full-on playthrough, I always end up doing things like Firefighter and other side missions first thing, to get the perks like being fireproof and infinite stamina early on, and make the rest of the playthrough a breeze. And once I get started with the missions, I think pretty much every single one of them is at least decent. I can't really say that any of them strike me as boring, although some of them can be repetitive in their nature, nor are any of them outright frustrating to do. You have your destroy 3 moving vans mission, a couple of auto-scroller shootouts, you know, the usual. So nothing out of the ordinary, although there are moments of uniqueness, like in the mission Taking the Peace, where you take over Paulie Sindaco's car while he is driving and run over the Forelli members he's meeting with. Kinda like the RC toy car side missions, but with an actual car, which is really cool. So while I would have liked for the story itself to have a proper villain and a showdown at the end, instead of having Torini, who's barely seen in the game and never even directly talks to Tony, the rest of the game is entertaining enough for me. Between the many goofy moments you have in the game, like Vincenzo running out of toilet paper as he's giving orders to us,
Oh, God, why is there never any goddamn paper in here?
and pretty much any cutscene involving Salvatore, there's moments in this game that make me question Tony's sanity. I understand the love he has for his mom, but turning Casa into deli meat was definitely something. And then towards the end of the game, we finally found out why Fort Staunton is in shambles during the events of GTA 3. Seriously, this man is leagues ahead of Trevor or any other character in the universe for that matter in terms of being insane. And because I've mentioned GTA 3, Liberty City Stories does improve at least over its direct predecessor. We now have bikes, and even a low reason as to why they don't exist 3 years later. Helicopters, although they aren't meant to be flown, but at least you can get one in certain missions, more weapons, more vehicle variety, a list of very interesting outfits for Tony, and like I've already mentioned, more stuff to do around the map. And although some gangs will hate you and attack you on sight, at least you can freely roam around the map at any point during or after the story is complete, without having to worry about being blown in the sky. What's interesting about LCS is that despite being considered a mediocre game by many fans of the franchise and not quite on the same level as VCS, which is much more beloved amongst the community, it actually sold more copies on the PSP, being the #1 best-selling game on that platform with over 8 million copies, as opposed to VCS, which only sold 5 million copies on the PSP. And also, VCS, which at this point is basically abandonware as it's been delisted from most if not all online stores, didn't get a mobile port either, unlike Liberty City Stories, which was released for Android and iOS for its 10th anniversary back in 2015. However, and this is something I've mentioned in my previous video as well, seeing as Rockstar cooked up a random port for the PS4 and Nintendo Switch of RDR1 out of nowhere 13 years after release, and now another port, but this time for the PC, is also less than 2 weeks away, again completely out of nowhere, I'm eager to believe that we might see a port of this game, as well as a few other GTAs and even other franchises that never got PC ports at some point in the future. If Rockstar were to take the mobile version of LCS and just port it over to PC, I would take it with open arms. All I'm asking is for whoever is working on the port to just port it. Don't remaster, don't retouch anything, because remasters of older GTA games don't really have a good track record. I remember a couple of years ago there were new ESRB ratings for LCS, with rumors of the game getting ported to the PS4 and maybe even Xbox, but nothing ever came of it, which is a real shame. But I'm glad that at least 2 of the most beloved handheld titles, those being LCS and Chinatown Wars, are still available for newer fans to enjoy, even if it's on mobile. Again, if 14 years later we saw the impossible happen with RDR1, why not keep this trend going with the older GTAs? And renewing licenses would be nice too, although I wouldn't really expect that to happen, since Rockstar's always been removing songs. I can't see why they would change for the better all of a sudden, but I can only hope. And despite the radio stations not being as jam-packed as in Vice City or San Andreas, the radio stations in this game do have some real bangers. Until then, the mobile version is pretty good, and even has a few visual improvements over the original, as well as reducing some of the level requirements for some missions from the usual 12 to only 9, which I don't mind at all. So if you've never tried LCS, I'd say you should definitely give it a shot. Again, despite the popular opinion that LCS is just an okay game, kinda like in the middle of the entire franchise, I personally enjoy it a lot more than even some of the newer ones. It's one of those comfort games for me, and I've seen that a lot of other people also shared this sentiment as well. As nonsensical as it might sound to hear this, LCS's inability to excel in any department over previous or following titles in the franchise makes it the perfect game to boot up and just get lost into. So again, if a game that was believed to be forever stuck on the PS3/Xbox 360 made it out, anything can happen at this point. But what do you think? Do you consider LCS to just be an okay game? Or perhaps do you think it leans more towards being a bad or a really good game? What are some of your favorite moments in this game, and do you think the game has any chance of seeing more ports to other platforms in the future? Let me know in the comment section down below. And while you're there, also leave a like. And of course, consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching.